It's good to have everyone here tonight. I'm John Hoover, the director of the library. Some of you have been with us for these Bixby Valentine's programs since the very beginning, when they were over across the street at my house and the whole house was decked out with Valentines. So it was, it was always good. This is such a large crowd from what Brittany has indicated, and I'm so pleased to know that I don't think everyone would have fit there, but tonight. But you know, virtually it's always great. But the library is a large space, and I hope that next year, certainly by October, we'll be back in person again. So, but thanks for being with us tonight virtually. Yes, it is always a harbinger for springtime, the Valentine's event. And because of the publication of this wonderful letter perfect, meticulously written book that Julie has been working on for years, it's a good time to launch it. The cloth edition came out this week, and it's available for sale. And we hope that everyone will get a copy of the 175th anniversary guide to art, which is so important that we could do that in our anniversary year. Well, libraries with art, books and art, a library and a museum. No other early American library, Athenaeum like ours, you know, really has done that more successfully over the generations. We're so, it's so fitting that we could present an author's conversation on how that relates to our history, our books, our paintings, and our collection, always here at the Mercantile. It's really what we live by here. So I'd like to present two distinguished professors. Julie Dunn-Morton, our curator of art here at the library, is interviewed by Ruth Bowen, author and president of the Mercantile Library's Art Museum, respectively. So Ruth, would you like to begin?
Certainly, thank you. My first question springs from the fact that this launch of the second edition of the Art Handbook is being sponsored by the Bixby Art Club. I wonder, Julie, if you could share with us some of the works in the collection that have a connection to books.
Absolutely, Ruth, thank you for that. And it is one of the things that's really at the heart of the Mercantile collection, is how parts of different collections intersect. So this idea of how books and art connect is very timely. I'm going to actually begin sharing my screen because I do have a few things to show everyone. Do that. Let's get everything situated. There we go. So one of the first things that comes to mind when you think of the intersection of books and art would, of course, be the works of John James Audubon, his Birds of America and Viviparous Quadrupeds. What I'm showing here is a plate from the Birds of America, the passenger pigeons. These were foundational pieces in the Mercantile collection, acquired in the 19th century, but we continue to build our Audubon collection with pieces that give a greater understanding of the artist's process and also just the immensity of these book projects. Two recent acquisitions that are illustrated in the handbook are the passenger pigeon and the three-toed woodpecker. Both of these are aquatint engravings that were never colored. And so one major reason for adding these to the collection is the ability to then compare side by side the colored and uncolored versions, and really helps understand better the process involved in creating these works. And so in Audubon's two extraordinary projects, we have wonderfully executed works of art that were intended to be bound and enjoyed as books. Artists as book illustrators is another example of the intersection between fine art and the book world. And I imagine everyone in the audience is familiar with the works of Thomas Hart Benton. I'm showing you here an ink and watercolor work by Benton of a towboat, alongside his cover for the 1945 edition of Francis Parkman's The Oregon Trail. In his biography, Benton really minimizes his illustration work, but he was quite popular and much in demand in that field. He created artwork for editions of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi, and Virginia Eifert's 3 Rivers South, the story of young Abe Lincoln, among many others. Peggy Bacon was an important American artist who initially trained with John Sloan and George Bellows at the Art Students League in New York. She taught herself the dry point etching technique since no one was teaching it at the time, and she became best known for satirical caricatures and illustrations. Now, normally, I'm sure you're aware that our primary collecting mission is Missouri Art and Artists, but we do have other tiers of our collecting mission, and among those, of course, are major American artists that connect to other collections. And so as an illustrator, Peggy Bacon very much fits into this aspect. She illustrated numerous books featuring cats. And those of you who came to the Natural History exhibition may recognize this illustration on the left, which was featured in that exhibition. In fact, the first book that she wrote and illustrated was a cat story entitled The True Philosopher and Other Cat Tales, published in 1919. She did another called Buttons that was very popular, but I'm illustrating here The Cat and Mrs. Carey, which is in the library collection. And that's, of course, your title page and an interior illustration. It appears she was quite fond of tabbies, a lot of orange tabbies in her work. Sheila Burlingame was a prolific St. Louis artist whose work included paintings, sculpture, and prints. And she did woodcuts for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in the 1920s, in addition to illustrating several books. What I'm showing here is one of her woodcuts there on the left, and the book 50 Famous Women by Clyde Robertson, published in 1936, which she illustrated with woodcut portraits based on existing paintings and prints. The book is actually a series of poems about each of these women. And I'm not sure how well you can read what's on the title, but it says no book ever written better serves its purpose of implanting salient facts in the reader's mind, invaluable to students. So no small claim to importance on the part of that book. Another area of even closer melding of art and book worlds is in the library's extensive collection of fine press works. A prime example is the work of the Janus Press, founded by Claire Van Vliet in 1955. Works like these are sometimes referred to as artist books, but while Van Vliet prefers to call herself a bookmaker, her work with the Janus Press incorporates a wide range of artistic practices. Each work is a collaboration resulting in hand-bound, limited edition letterpress books with texts by historic and contemporary authors. The shape of each book and the construction of the pages is entirely dictated by the needs of the text. And many of them, as this one, when you open them up, become freestanding sculptural forms. For this work, for example, the text was prepared, typographically designed, and hand set by Michael Alpert at the Theodore Press in Bangor, Maine. It was printed at the Janus Press in Newark, Vermont by Michael Alpert and Claire Van Vliet, and the book structure and box were designed by Van Vliet. So a true collaboration, creating a wonderful work of art. Any lover of rare and historic books is familiar with the important role of marbled paper, and the library has an extensive collection of this wonderful art form as well. Examples are found as end papers in books of many eras, but we also have examples of single sheets created by St. Louis artist Curtis Finley. Some of the audience may remember an exhibition on marbled paper that we presented in 2005. titled A Snail, a Peacock, and a Tiger's Eye. Recently, this collection has grown with both modern and historic examples. An amazing donation of historic and contemporary marbled paper and also French and Italian decorative papers came to us in 2018 and featured numerous patterns, many in duplicate sheets, by the Italian firm Giulio, Giannini, and Filio. And my apologies to anyone who actually speaks Italian. The company was founded in Florence in 1856 as a stationer and custom bookbinder. In the 1880s, they became noted for elaborate parchment bindings decorated with gold leaf in the Florentine style. The company continues to create marbled paper today, along with many other wonderful stationery items. Robert Wu, in comparison, is a contemporary artist who describes himself as an art bookbinder and marbler. He originated the form he calls marbled graphics, created by manipulating the marbled paper process. This piece, entitled Sunflower, is from 2014 and was a museum purchase. So these are just a few examples of the many ways that art and books connect and interact in the collection.
Thank you, Julie. Portraits made up a good part of the collection from the library's earliest days, which makes sense considering the library's 19th century roots and its role as a leading cultural organization. How has the portrait collection grown in recent years?
Ruth, you make an important point about the very deep roots of the portrait collection. And some of our early examples, since we're just talking about books, are still tied in so many ways to books and book people, which is, as you said, natural for a library. So just briefly, some examples of that would be Kurtz and Allison's print of Ralph Waldo Emerson on the left, which you can actually see on display in the current exhibition. In the center is a portrait by an unknown artist of Joseph Charles Sr., who was, of course, the noted newspaper man and printer. And then on another note, even William Cogswell's portrait of Joseph Charles Jr., as an example of the role portraits played in the early library collection. This work was commissioned for the library by a group of Charles's friends after his tragic and untimely death. Another foundational piece in the art collection is the portrait of George Washington by George Caleb Bingham, which of course is accompanied by Bingham's portrait of Martha Washington as well. Portraits of historic figures were another natural choice for a cultural institution, especially one with an educational mission like ours. And we continue to grow the collection in similar areas. And one example is on the right. In recent years, we've purchased several presidential portraits produced by Elijah Middleton in the 1880s and 1890s. He used a unique process to produce what he called an oleograph, which was a chromolithograph made using oils, and it was meant to replicate the look of an oil painting. The series was incredibly popular and included several presidents, Mrs. Washington, and other military leaders. The portrait collection has grown through both purchases and donations, and with works both modern and historic. One thing that ties together some recent donations is that the sitters were all St. Louisans, some famous and some not, but all part of our region's history. In 2019, I was contacted by the director of the St. Louis Metropolitan Medical Society about the possible donation of portraits the society had acquired over its long history. Among them were these companion portraits of Dr. John T. Hodgen and Mrs. Elizabeth Mudd Hodgen, painted in 1861. Dr. Hodgen was an important figure in the medical field, serving as president of both the St. Louis Medical Society and the Missouri State Medical Association, and he was one of only 5 Missourians who were ever serving as president of the American Medical Association. The paintings are the work of George Eichbaum, a Kansas native who opened a studio in St. Louis in 1859 and became one of the most popular portrait painters in the city. Now, one scholar claims that he was informally trained by George Caleb Bingham, but that connection has not been documented. However, Bingham's patron, James Sidney Rollins, was also a patron of Eichbaum, who did portraits of Rollins' wife and son. So the two artists were moving in similar circles. These portraits are notable not only for the historical significance of Dr. Hodgin, and Mrs. Hodgin was quite a philanthropist in her own right, and then of course Eichbaum as an important St. Louis artist, but they're also a stellar example of ornate 19th century frames. Among the other portraits from the Medical Society were some that were important not so much for the sitter as for the artist, because there were works by some noted St. Louis artists, including Fred Conway and Virginia Moberly Schluter. Another donation of historic companion portraits came from a St. Louis family. These two works are by an unknown artist who depicted Captain Dan Abel and Mrs. Molly Abel in the mid-19th century. Dan Abel was a prominent riverboat captain and owner. By the age of 23, he was captain of the Anthony Wayne, and in 1858, he was among the founders of the Memphis and St. Louis Packet Company. His prominence in the riverboat industry brought him in contact with Samuel Clemens, whose letters describe Abel as a friend. The current installation of the art collection includes these portraits paired with the terracotta bust of Mark Twain by Robert Porter Bringhurst to help illustrate this connection. Family often plays a role in an artist's work since they are subjects readily at hand. And this is true for several paintings we acquired by St. Louis artist Eloise Long Wells. Wells was born in Alton, Illinois, but her family moved to St. Louis when she was 4. Her maternal grandfather was Richard Compton of Compton and Dry fame, so she had an artistic heritage and she built on that with formal training. Wells's work focused on scenes of St. Louis life, views of the riverfront, and many portraits of her family, such as this painting of one of her sons reading a book. By contrast, the work on the right she initially called a character sketch, but then retitled it Loneliness. It's a more intuitive portrait of a young woman standing forlornly next to a suitcase. And I think it's works like these, some a more straightforward portrait and some just sort of intuitive, one step away perhaps from a character study, that really makes portraits such a fascinating subject and a new way to look at how artists are getting their thoughts onto the canvas. The library expanded the portrait collection in 2018 with 2 works by a contemporary St. Louis artist, Roland Burrow. Burrow is an UMSL graduate who draws inspiration from the old masters' techniques and their use of light and shadow, while applying those methods to his portraits with a contemporary voice. While the painting Rose identifies the sitter, it's definitely not a traditional portrait of a seated female figure. Instead, Rose's intense, direct gaze imbues her with a sense of power and control. It reminds me in many ways of the direct gaze of early colonial portraits when that was really not the norm. On the other hand, the painting on the left, entitled Letting Go, makes it clear this is as much a psychological portrait as it is a depiction of the subject, and the unusual composition adds to the image's ambiguity. We've also had some very exciting portrait editions in the sculpture collection, and not always in the way that one might expect. A fairly recent acquisition by another contemporary St. Louis artist, it's John Neihart's Black Elk and the Sacred Pipe by R.H. Dick. This piece is an addition to Bob Seary's Missouri History in Bronze, and it's a visual representation of Neihart's book, Black Elk Speaks. The book was based on the author's interviews with Black Elk, a Lakota Sioux holy man. Historical subjects have always been of interest to Bob because he has a master's degree in history and taught that subject for many years. His Western subjects and his use of bronze are inspired by the works of Charlie Russell and Frederick Remington, while his method of introspective portraits follows the tradition of his teacher, Bettina Steinke. More recently, the library acquired The Fugitive Story, an important work by American artist John Rogers. His painted plaster sculptures of literary subjects and gently humorous genre scenes were mass-produced using molds and thus were more affordable to middle-class audiences. This earned him the title The Currier and Ives of Sculpture. But in addition to these light-hearted subjects, Rogers also chose themes that expressed his anti-slavery views. A prime example is this piece that shows 3 leaders of the abolitionist movement listening carefully to a young woman as she tells her tale of escape from enslavement. Standing behind the desk are, on the left, Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, and the poet John Greenleaf Whittier. The journalist and reformer William Lloyd Garrison is seated on the right. The sculpture actually has the name of each of the male figures carved into the base, and it was praised at the time for the accuracy of the portraits. Rogers worked from photographs, drawings, and life masks to ensure the figures were recognizable, which would add significantly to both the sculpture and to its theme. So here we have an artist known for imaginative work who specifically chose to incorporate portraits into this piece to more clearly tell an important story. In addition to formal portraits, artist archives have included portraits in the form of academic figure studies and drawings. Very often these give us a new way of looking at an artist's working methods, while also showing us how they interpret the human form. These 2 pieces are from a collection of drawings by Frank Nudisher that were donated to the library by Nudisher's last student, artist James Godwin Scott. Nudisher was largely self-taught, although he appears to have studied or at least taken classes in New York, Philadelphia, and St. Louis. And he also reported studying independently in various galleries and museums while he traveled in Europe. He's known primarily for landscapes in oil, so the gift of these figural pieces greatly expanded our ability to tell the story of Nudisher's career. Here he's used pencil and watercolor to experiment with aspects of facial features, body proportions, posing, and costume. It's interesting to consider to what extent what he learned from the early character study might have impacted what he was doing in the portrait sketch he created some 30 years later. Just quickly, I'd like to show some other portrait studies that have come into the collection through artist archives. On the left is an ink drawing by William Conrad Severson, a St. Louis sculptor who was a partner with Saunders Schultz in creating monumental abstract works for cities and institutions around the world. According to the artist's daughter, who donated his archives to the library, this drawing from 1945 is a self-portrait. The other image on the slide is from Louis Rubenstein's sketchbook of mining images. Much of Rubenstein's art focused on workmen and the industrial landscape. He spent extended periods of time in mining camps, and this image reveals how he worked quickly to sketch the miners as they worked, ate, or rested. Just comparing these two, Severson's early sketch shows a younger artist exploring the technique of ink drawing and the skills needed to depict the human face. But Rubenstein captures, even with just a few lines, the features, the strength, and the character of this working man. Gustav Goethe was another artist better known for his landscapes. Goethe was extensively trained, and he actually taught in art schools in Minneapolis and St. Louis. Most of his works are oil paintings and etchings, but among the many works donated recently by the artist's son are these two sensitive and insightful portraits. In both pieces, he used greater detail and more shading to make the sitters' faces the focal point, where he has captured some wonderfully enigmatic expressions. Goethe also did numerous self-portraits, something many artists did so they could work on their portrait skill without the expense of a model. In a way, self-portraits are perhaps the most revealing portraits of all. These two self-portraits by Gustav Goethe are showing him at an earlier age in the pencil drawing, and then later in life in the etching. In our collection, we also have two oil self-portraits and a painting of the artist's studio, another subject he painted several times, which I suppose could be looked at as a portrait of his artistic life. Similarly, we have self-portraits by Siegfried Reinhardt earlier and later in his career. Reinhardt was a painter, muralist, teacher, and illustrator. He was exceptionally prolific and is best known for his intensely imaginative, surrealist style of art. I think some of that drama and imagination can even be seen in this self-portrait on the left from when he was only 15 years old. Wallace Herndon Smith was also wonderfully imaginative in his self-portrait entitled The Creative Impulse. He uses a very traditional pose for an artist's self-portrait. He has a canvas on his easel and he's holding his palette and brushes ready to go to work. However, Smith, I think, pokes a little bit of fun at the sometimes stuffy or aggrandizing tone that can be found in other artists' self-portraits. His wry smile and delicately posed fingers tell us he can acknowledge his considerable talent while not taking himself too seriously. Harry Mathis, on the other hand, created a more serious self-portrait with a frontal presentation created using dynamic brushstrokes and dramatic shadows. Mathis did illustration work in addition to easel paintings, becoming best known for works in an abstract expressionist style. Joe Jones is quoted as saying that Harry Mathis was the only artist who ever taught him anything. The self-portraits I've shown are really what one would expect when you think about the genre, but I will close with one more work that is wonderfully executed and far different from anything we've seen so far. St. Louis artist Stan Masters titled this watercolor painting Self-Portrait. He was raised in the Missouri Pacific Railroad section house in Kirkwood, literally within feet of the railroad tracks, and railroad themes were a consistent subject for him. Masters took inspiration from Winslow Homer, Andrew Wyeth, and Edward Hopper. I think you can certainly see some of Edward Hopper's isolationist feeling in this particular work. This is one of those paintings whose title and composition combine to create such a mystery. It begs a narrative and more exploration to better understand the artist's intentions. Portraits are such a fascinating subject that it would be easy to go on, but I think this gives a good overview of how the collection has grown and the directions we're taking. Ruth? Brittany, I think we might have lost Ruth.
Okay, let me see if I can resend her a link and get her back in.
Okay, so in the meantime, as I'm sure you can all tell, we did a little advanced preparation. So our next question, we were going to pivot to landscapes, which are another important part of the collection.
Here she is, she's back.
Excellent, welcome back, Ruth. You can ask the question yourself.
You'll just need to unmute yourself though, Ruth.
Okay, thank you. Landscapes were also a foundational part of the Mercantile Art Museum collection. How do the first landscape paintings you are acquiring today build on or reflect the early examples in the collection, and what are these connections?
Thank you, Ruth. Sometimes, as with the drawings and the figures studies we just saw that were found in a larger artist archives that we received, sometimes you have that serendipity of finding a wonderful piece that extends your understanding of the artist's work and your ability to tell that story in the gallery. Normally, however, acquisitions are very intentional and they're made to fill particular needs in the collection. A good example of this is the work of Joseph Rusling Meeker, whose view of the Merrimack near Glencoe has been in the collection since the 1870s, and a recent acquisition that was needed to more fully tell the story of his career. Meeker's autumn landscape of the Merrimack River was commissioned for the library by a group of members, most of whom already owned one of his paintings. So in this one work, we have a representation of Meeker's successful career in St. Louis, the library's role as an art center for the city, and the interest its patrons had in fine art. What we didn't have already in the collection until recently was an example of Meeker's other major subject, and that was the bayous of Louisiana. He discovered these while he was working as a paymaster for the Navy during the Civil War, traveling up and down the Mississippi River. We purchased this charcoal drawing of a bayou scene to at least partially address that need. In an even more dramatic way, we had acquired some rare landscape sketches by Carl Weimar, an important artist for Missouri and the exploration of the West, but we did not have an oil painting. The opportunity to acquire this Weimar oil that is a study for one of his major compositions was an exciting acquisition that filled a significant gap in the collection. The same was true for the artist Henry Lewis, who was known for his city views and panorama paintings. While we had two examples of a watercolor panorama study and an extensive collection of his publication, Valley of the Mississippi Illustrated, we did not have an oil painting by Henry Lewis. And oils by Lewis don't come up that often. This painting was generously donated by a St. Louis family in honor of John Hoover's anniversary with the library. It was the best possible tribute for John, who's a great admirer of Lewis's work. And those of you who have your art handbook or remember the one John held up will notice that this is the cover for the second edition. Now, in some cases, additions to the collection continue a theme that earlier artists explored, such as creating images of the city of St. Louis. This continuation of a theme can provide instructive comparisons in the gallery, and we have continued to build in that direction as well. For example, Anton Schutz etching Canyon of Olive Street, St. Louis, and Matthias Schroeder's Winter in the City are examples of acquisitions that continue the urban landscape tradition with works of art by artists not yet in the collection. Little is known about Matthias Schroeder other than his German heritage and his having been in St. Louis at the time this winter scene was painted. Anton Schutz was a New York artist who created detailed engravings of urban scenes across the country. And I have found examples of his images in the Post-Dispatch. We had two works by Angelo Carubia in the collection, both pastel rural landscapes, when we received the very generous donation of a large collection of his paintings. Carubia was a practicing architect, so his city views often very naturally include buildings. These two works show a detail of an old St. Louis neighborhood and the city skyline as seen from Forest Park. Carubia worked in pastels and oil on site in various locations around the city. His works provide a closer look at some of the city's architecture that we don't have in works by other artists. Unlike Carubia, we were fortunate to have several works by Joe Jones in the collection when other acquisition opportunities arose. I imagine most of you are familiar with Jones and have very likely seen the drawing on the left of the St. Louis riverfront with its dynamic modern interpretation of the skyline. In the same year, Jones created a more focused view of the city, narrowing it down to one corner, seen from above. Despite the mundane details of the manhole cover, the fire hydrant, and the mailbox, rather than simply documenting this street corner, Jones was experimenting with reducing forms to basic geometrics and using light and shadow to create a more interpretive impression of St. Louis. The riverfront drawing was purchased from the artist by Ruth Ferris and came to us as part of her major river collection. We acquired the street corner as an example of Jones' lithograph work and as an additional representation of his style during this period. Beyond the idea of subject, though, the style of landscape painting, as it changes over time, reflects contemporary ideas, and this also guides new acquisitions. One such stylistic area is how artists have adopted or developed new visual languages, as Jones was doing here, to create uniquely expressive landscape paintings. Gustav Wolff and William Hardy both adopted a loose painterly brushstroke in the landscape depictions you're looking at here. Wolfe was a student of Paul Kanoyer and is known for his impressionist landscapes. Hardy's work was typically less impressionistic, which made this work more appealing for the collection, along with its subject of Creve Coeur Lake. Few subjects hold as much potential for expressive use of color and composition as a nocturne. These two works are by artists who were well represented in the collection when the opportunity arose to acquire them. But their unique subject and beautiful execution made them welcome additions. They each have some added elements, which just made them even more appealing. For example, the nudisher on the right actually has an artist's frame, and that's always adds extra layers of interpretive opportunity for a work of art. The Sylvester on the left is significant for a couple of reasons. It was painted very close to his death. And it's also a two-sided piece and has some figure studies on the back. So each of these, as I said, although we had several works by these artists, these brought something very new and a whole additional layer of how we could look at that artist's career and his body of work. The library is actively building a complete set of the lithographs of Thomas Hart Benton. So when those become available, it's generally a fairly easy collecting decision to make. Benton's work is well known for the fluid lines of his figures and forms, which are very evident in this print. The tragedy of the flood, he's highlighted by separating the human forms from the floodwaters by that line of sandbags that cuts across the image. Benton was involved in the St. Genevieve Art Colony, as was Jessie Beard Rickley, and some of the fluidity of Benton's line can be seen in her watercolor landscape. Works that reflect shared experiences between artists and that also show an experimentation with style, as Rickley is doing here, are always strong additions to the collection. Artists of the St. Genevieve Art Colony are a major collecting area that we pursued with these two acquisitions. Collecting decisions here were influenced by quality, of course, but also by how the subject matter and the period of the artist's career compared to other works by each artist that we already owned. Vorst's painting of mules, a frequent subject for him, also featured the St. Genevieve setting, which made this a good choice for us. The piece by Martel shows her at a transitional stage of her career after her time at St. Genevieve, but not yet in her fully abstract style. Although we have several works by Vorst, one of which does include mules, we have only one other painting by Martel, and it's from her St. Genevieve period. So this was a nice addition for that reason. Mules were so frequently used by Vorst that it's wonderful to be able to compare how he uses them in different works. Those of you who've had a look at the handbook, either the new or the previous version, will know that we are fortunate to have a print and a drawing of mules in a similar composition, which really helps sort of explicate the whole idea of how he used mules and what their symbology might be for him. Werner Dreves spent many years teaching art in St. Louis and had a major impact not just here, but around the world. He was a leading figure in American abstraction, working in a variety of media. We have examples of his landscapes in woodcut, but this watercolor of the river and the steamer Sprague was acquired because it's a St. Louis subject that is also a strong representation of his style and his expressive color. As you've seen in previous sections, the library continues to collect the works of contemporary Missouri artists, and it's not surprising that they too are interpreting familiar themes in bold, inventive ways. Barbara Martin Smith has depicted the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers in several of her works, often animating the scene with brilliant color. She also uses an aerial view and an exaggerated horizontal format to emphasize the drama of this location that is so pivotal in the founding of St. Louis. Well, Ruth, this just skims a rock, so to speak, across landscapes in the collection, but I hope it gives a good idea of our collecting mission and goals and how works we acquire get us closer to accomplishing those goals. All right, I can't seem to get rid of the screen sharing, Brittany.
Let me see if I can help out. Oh, there it
I
goes.
got it now. Clicked out, it might just close.
And it looks like, I don't know if something, oh, okay, she's probably going to leave and then try and get back in.
Okay.
She's not having too many technical issues.
Well, that's the nature of the technology, right? These things happen.
I did notice a couple of those artists that you were speaking about are in the room with us, virtually, so to speak.
Well, always happy to have them here. I think it's one of the great advantages of the Mercantile is that we do collect contemporary artists, and you may have an opportunity to walk through the gallery at the same time that the artist is right there. So definitely a treat for our visitors. Well, I will just perhaps move ahead. We were going to wrap up our discussion this evening with a little look at what's ahead for the art collection. And I would like to share that we are planning new exhibitions throughout the library in the summer and fall of 2023. That's when the Americana exhibition will be closing. And there will be new art installations at that time, both on level 1 and of course in the Meyer Gallery, which has is an ongoing art venue for us. But we do have a truly exciting opportunity coming forward. We are working with the university and the Thomas Jefferson Library to launch a capital campaign for renovations to level 2 to create a dedicated art gallery adjacent to the Mercantile main lobby. We already have one major donor committed to funding this program, and we are approaching others. So we'll keep our members and friends advised of our progress. And we'll also be letting you know of ways in which you could help us move the library and its art collection forward as we begin our next 175 years.
Thanks, Julie. Your insights and discussion of the works in the collection, I think, very informative and quite interesting. Brittany, are there any questions from the audience?
I absolutely welcome anyone to either use the Q&A feature or drop some questions in the chat box. I will be surveying both of these and taking some of those questions.
And as long as we don't have one of the artists in the audience asking why I didn't show a different work. That was one of the challenges, most definitely, was wanting to put everything into the slideshow. Because it's been such an exciting process of building the collection, really starting on a strong foundation from our founders, but also all the work that John did building the collection before I came. So I think that's part of why these two art handbooks really are important to tell the story of the collection and to preserve that information.
Okay, I see one. So Jackie Bossler is asking, are you also collecting photography as an art form?
Actually, that's a wonderful question, Jackie. Thank you. We are, in fact, collecting photography. We've always had photographs in the collection. First thing comes to mind, of course, is the Edward Curtis, a wonderful, wonderful collection, 20 volumes of photogravures. Some of those are on display right now in the exhibition. We also have other more documentary photographs that have historical significance as well as real beauty. The Houseworth photographs of Yosemite. But then other St. Louis photographers have come into the collection, Emile Boll. We also received in recent years a full collection of the work of, Heidi Lapata Sherman, thank you, sorry about the brain cramp. A really amazing St. Louis photographer. Shortly after she passed away, her husband donated to us and produced a little catalog, and we had an exhibition of her work that was very well received.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Okay, we've got a couple here. So I'll start with Alyssa's. She says, the portraits of the Hodgsons got me wondering how often in the Mercantile's history have portraits of St. Louisans or other artwork by St. Louisans been acquired from people renovating old St. Louis homes?
Well, I can't speak definitely to the renovation. Perhaps John would want to weigh in on that element, but it frequently happens that as people are downsizing, they are looking for a reliable home for something from their personal collection. And that is actually the story at the Metropolitan Medical Society. They were moving to a smaller building and just needed a good home for some of these paintings. So it does often happen, much the same way that the rest of us occasionally go through things and say, not everything can stay. But we've had many good acquisitions come that way.
Thank you. And Eileen Murray says, Julie, my late husband was a cousin of Dr. Hodgson, and the Mudd family was related as well. If you are interested in genealogy, just to please let her know, and she will get you in touch or get in touch with you about the family. They go back to Kentucky pioneers. So that's interesting.
That's very exciting. I would very much appreciate extra information. The Medical Society had files on the doctors whose portraits were donated, but they were largely from the professional side, from their interactions with the Medical Society, not so much their personal life. So extra details would be wonderful. Thank you. I will be in touch.
All right, so we still have a bit of time left. If anyone has more questions, just feel free.
Well, perhaps I can turn the table a little, and if anyone would like to weigh in the chat. Was there anything that you saw this evening in the presentation, any works of art that surprised you or that you found particularly interesting?
It's a good one.
Basically just want people to validate my choices since it was so hard to weed this down.
So Wayne says, the last painting you showed, Confluence Landscape.
Yeah, the Confluence is a wonderful piece. Barbara Martin Smith had taken part in our print fairs for several years. She's still being represented by St. Louis Galleries, so her works are very much available. She's very creative and so masterful in the technique of watercolor. In our collection, we could do an incredible exhibition of just watercolors. I see Nick's comment, and no, it does not surprise me that the Railroad Curator likes the Stan Masters piece. Although maybe I should say it does surprise me because it seems a little sad. I didn't think that railroad people like to see abandoned trains, although perhaps we'll give the artist a little license on that one. So the marble paper got a shout out from Annie, which I appreciate. The marble paper is amazing. And the Wells Loneliness. Yeah, that's an interesting little painting. And actually, it's actually in storage right here. And it has a wonderful label on the back, which I will just share. She liked it well enough to include it in an exhibition, and I'm hoping that shows up. So it was actually included in a Thumbbox exhibition put on by the St. Louis Art League. So that too tells you a lot about a work of art when it's something an artist chose for exhibition. So what is Sarah saying to us? The Art Handbook's introduction opens with a beautiful quote from the library's 1853 annual report about how art can be rejuvenating and save people in a way, offering an escape from the difficulties of life. I think we can all agree today life is full of difficulties. To this end, in what ways does the art library seek to engage new, diverse audiences through outreach and collecting? And do you find the collections offer these same healing benefits to audiences of today? Well, thank you, first of all, for noticing the quote, Sarah, because it's really sort of a foundational statement for why we have art, and not just us. There were studies done during the pandemic shutdowns that showed the importance of art and cultural interactions for people and how rejuvenating they can be. Art therapy is a well-documented process. So art has so many opportunities for people at various institutions. I can say that our collections, in terms of your diversity question, we are always reaching out through our board members, through our other contacts in the community, with partnerships and support for other organizations' programs. We'll continue to do that and build on that. We are actively looking for diverse artists, which is easy to do in St. Louis, and especially in contemporary artists. So the opportunities are there, and we are actively looking for them. I personally find a great deal of healing benefit in art. It's always been one of the greatest joys of working here is to be surrounded by the collection. And no matter how frustrating your day might get, all you have to do is look around or walk around and just be reminded of the beauty that people have found in the world and marvel at their skill in translating that into something permanent that we can all enjoy.
So as far as anyone, what may have surprised some people, Jackie Vossler commented that she was most surprised by the more contemporary work.
Okay, well, and I mean, we are a historic institution, so perhaps the fact that we continue to collect modern works can be a little surprising. It's one of the really exciting aspects of the collection. And, I find Roland Burroughs' work very exciting. John actually introduced me to Wu, the marbled paper artist, and he just amazes me completely. So many aspects of the collection, people just continue to do incredible things. And that's the joy of being able to build a collection like this. And I see Joe Carpenter commented Nocturnes. I love Nocturnes, Joe. I'm totally in there with you. The Sylvester is so haunting and beautiful and so different from his other works that it's, to me, it's a powerful statement for an artist so close to the end of his life. So Nick is saying, in the course of collecting and conserving the collection, have you found additional surprises like the exhibition label? Is that something that is generally uncommon? There have been surprises. There was a piece we had conserved. It was a watercolor that had been attached to a board, and it was an acidic board. So we took it to a paper conservator who was able to remove it only to reveal another watercolor on the back. The one on the front had some fading because it had been exposed to light. The one on the back was pristine. So a wonderful bonus there. The two-sided artwork is always a treat to see how artists don't want to waste a piece of paper, don't even want to waste a canvas. We have more than one canvas in the collection that has paintings on both sides. Conservation can sometimes reveal good surprises and sometimes not so good surprises, but that's why we conserve things to keep them in good shape. And the exhibition labels, those are always great to find. That's history, and that's the life of the artifact right there in a piece of paper. Thanks for that question, Nick. That was a good one. Anybody else? We're pretty close to 6:30. John, do you have any comments you'd like to close this with?
Oh, yes, sure. I'm so pleased with tonight, Julie. It's just been a great piece to, to hear all of this. I agree too. I wouldn't be me if I didn't like the marbled paper, and everyone, doesn't it photograph well? It photographs well in black and white and in color. And I'm looking so forward to other programs, that that we've, that we have and here. And but everyone, I think it's so important to think about how all of these works have sort of a narrative. And I just think of the Burns pedestal bust and all of the authors in the library. When I first walked into this institution, I looked around and was blown away with how emblematic the collections were to the books themselves. And it never has stopped with contemporary pieces as well as older pieces in this institution. And Julie, so much of the credit, this great book, the second edition of a really a great labor of love that you've done for all of us. It's no exaggeration tonight, Bixby Club members, to realize that you're all great book collectors, and Julie's collecting prowess is in this art. And 90% at least of the images that you saw tonight have been collected in the last 19 years in which Julie has been here, and most of them since the first edition of the Art Handbook of 15 years ago. So that's a great record about how this collection continues to grow under the leadership of Julie. And so thank you, Julie, and thank you all for being here tonight and being with us to celebrate this book. It wouldn't be our Valentine's party if I didn't show that. This is a magic trick, don't play tricks on me, be my Valentine. So this was found in a book. We find most of our favorite Valentines in books that come as donations, and then they go right into the collection. So that's another exhibition soon to come. So thank you all tonight, and happy Valentine's Day coming up.
Thanks, everyone.